Welcome to the Budo Bite mini podcast, your essential guide to the fascinating world of Japanese Budo, culture and philosophy. I'm Alex Bennett, a long-time martial arts practitioner, researcher and writer based in Kyoto, Japan, with decades of experience training, teaching and navigating the rich complexities of Budo. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Budo Bite. Now, to make sense of Musashi's formative years, especially the stretch between Sekigahara in 1600 and the next 10 years or so up to his duel in Ganryujima, we need to set aside the grand myth of the lone prodigy striding from one glorious duel to another. The real story is more tangled. I think it's more human and far more revealing. So in this episode of Budo Bite, I want to dig into that turning point in Kyoto, when a young Musashi took on the Yoshioka clan. It's one of the most famous episodes in his legend, but to understand why it happened at all, we really need the world around him to come back into focus. Now, Japan in 1600 was still groaning under the weight of, nearly 2 centuries of civil war. Sekigahara is often remembered as the single event that changed everything. But in truth, it was, I guess you could say, kind of like the push that tipped the exhausted country towards Tokugawa stability. Everything after that was the long cleanup. Now, popular fiction loves the image of Musashi charging through the mist of Sekigahara like some battle-born comet. Yoshikawa Eiji's novel even opens with him lying wounded in Sekigahara's bloodied mud when his side, the side he had been fighting for, was routed by the Tokugawa forces. But when we turn to sources that were actually written by people with access to reliable accounts, a more grounded picture emerges. Well, most of the time. The Bukoden places him with Ukita Hideie's forces, who were firmly on Ishida Mitsunari's Western Army side, and they were opposing Tokugawa Ieyasu. Yet no contemporary evidence actually supports this. Move to the Bushu Genshin Denrai, and things become more convincing, or perhaps a little bit more convincing. Its author, Tanji Hawking, was the 4th son of a senior Kuroda clan retainer. Now, he was close enough to people who were involved that gossip, oral accounts and various internal documents were available to him. And he records Musashi not at Sekigahara, but in Kyushu under Kuroda Josui, helping to fight the Western aligned factions in Kyushu. Now, given the Kuroda clan's political cunning and their central role in supporting the Tokugawa forces and Tokugawa's strategy, this fits the broader historical context much better. Now, if Hawking is right, then Musashi's first real taste of war was not the grand set piece of Sekigahara, but the chaotic, hard-fought Kyushu front, which happened at the same time, where the Kuroda were indispensable in crushing pockets of Western resistance, while Ieyasu fought in the east. Now, if so, Musashi's foundational lessons came from serving under one of the shrewdest military families in the land. The aftermath of Sekigahara was quite brutal. daimyo were pretty much stripped of their lands, at least the ones that bet on the wrong racehorse, and great houses, well, they were reduced to shadows of their former selves. And tens of thousands of retainers suddenly had no stipends and basically no future. So highways were pretty much filled with rōnin. Some became gamblers or outlaws, and others drifted from town to town, while many carried the emotional and physical tension of the Sengoku years in their bodies and their swords. It was a very frustrating time. Now, Yoshikawa's novel captures this atmosphere quite brilliantly. Highly recommended. Anyway, even after Tokugawa Ieyasu became shogun in 1603, no one actually believed the fighting was truly over. Osaka Castle sat brooding on the horizon like a powder keg, and chroniclers of the day noted that another war felt almost inevitable. The shogunate responded by planting a kind of a fortress network across western Japan, including Himeji, which is very close to where Musashi came from, and this was to contain the Toyotomi. Now, in this rather uneasy climate, skilled fighters were in demand. Now, with rōnin everywhere and daimyo, well, they're fearful of what might come next, the early 1600s became a kind of a golden age of Musha Shugyō, where those rough and ready warrior training journeys where hungry young swordsmen would travel a country looking for challenges, looking for matches to test their mettle and their luck. And lords tested unknown swordsmen by matching them with their own retainers. So rōnin challenged one another just to put food in their bellies, basically, or their names on someone's list. It was a world where reputation was currency. This is the world Musashi stepped into. Yet the factual record about who he fought and when is much thinner than people imagine. Now, the earliest written source mentioning Musashi's duels is that good old Kokura inscription, and that was carved 9 years after Musashi's death by his adopted son Iori. Now, it briefly notes his 3 bouts with the Yoshioka and his duel with Kojiro. More colourful accounts only appear decades later, like 70 years later, in the Honcho Buge Shoden, and then in, for example, the Bushu Genshin Kodenrai, and finally the Nitenki, which was written more than a century after Musashi's time. Now, these later works are the foundation of most modern retellings, including, the novels, film, manga, TV, and so on. Because these sources are late and often literary in tone, we have to be a bit careful. Now, traditional law says Musashi fought more than 60 duels without a loss. In reality, only 6 to 8 are strongly attested. For example, the one I mentioned last time with Arimakihei, the Yoshioka series of duels, Muso Gonnosuke, and of course Kojiro. But the climate of the early 17th century in Japan makes it entirely believable that he fought many unrecorded encounters. So when Musashi says in the Gorin no Sho that he fought more than 60 matches, it should be understood as a rounded expression of his reputation rather than a precise number, a precise tally. In this world, dueling was not a sport. It was employment. It was how a young rōnin proved that he was worth employing and worth feeding. So Musashi struck out for Kyoto at around 21. That would have been in 1602. And he was determined not to ask for a post, not for employment, but to seize recognition by force of skill. He wanted to be Tenkaichi, which is number one under heaven. And Kyoto was the perfect stage. It was the martial crossroads of Japan. It was the place where every ambitious school or lineage and rōnin collided. In the Gorin no Sho, Musashi simply notes that at 21, he went to the capital and fought several matches against masters of the realm, and he won them all. He gives no names, he just kicked butt. But the Kokura inscription tells us that he fought members of the Yoshioka school 3 times and won each encounter. The Yoshioka school traced its heritage to the old Kyo-Hachiryu, which was a cluster of early Kyoto sword traditions that later generations treated as the capital's foundational kenjutsu streams. Now, his adoptive father, Munisai, had once been summoned before Ashikaga Yoshiaki, who was the last shogun of the Muromachi period, to face Yoshioka Kenpo, who was the shogun's instructor. Now, Munisai apparently won 2 of the 3 matches and received the title Unrivaled Beneath the Sun. Now, Musashi likely felt compelled to prove that he too could surpass the famed Yoshioka. Now, according to the inscription on the Kokura monument, the first bout took place around 1604 against Seijuro, who was Kenpo's son and head of the school, and this duel took place at Rendaino in Kyoto. Now, Musashi apparently struck him down with 1 blow of his wooden sword. And apparently, Seijuro survived, but abandoned swordsmanship and retired to a monastery somewhere because he was no longer fit to lead the school. Next came his younger brother, Denshichiro, carrying a largish wooden sword over 5 shaku long, which is roughly, 150 centimeters or so. Musashi apparently wrested it away and killed him with a single powerful strike. Now, with Seijuro injured and Denshichiro dead, the Yoshioka disciples plotted revenge. They proposed a match with young Matashichiro, who was, little more than a boy and served as I guess you could say, a symbolic figurehead of the collapsing Yoshioka line, more than a genuine challenger. But he gathered a large group armed with spears and bows to ambush Musashi at Sagarimatsu, the drooping pine which still stands in Ichijoji in Kyoto. Again, we have to, kind of imagine the scene because, nobody had smartphones back then, but Yoshikawa Eiji, I think in his novel, paints the scene really, really brilliantly, in the novel. Again, check it out. Anyway, Musashi sensed that, this was a trap. He told his student to wait behind and he went and met them alone. And he returned unharmed. Now, the inscription on the Kokura monument doesn't go into too many details. Only that he kicked some butt and he survived. The dramatic details that we all know come from the Nitenki. Now, this includes the story of Musashi arriving late to earlier matches, but arriving early for the final one, the 3rd one. And his hesitation before the Hachiman Shrine, the dialogue with his disciple, and the clean single stroke that felled Matashichiro. Now, these embellishments, they make great drama, but, they bear the fingerprints of later storytellers. The Nitenki even echoes the line from Musashi's later Dokkodo about respecting deities without relying on them. So this is all part of the story that we know today. It's a good part of the story, but it's not necessarily true. This is a telling clue that the shrine episode, for example, is probably literary invention, but still a ripping yarn. Still, even stripped of, this kind of embellishment, the core facts remain, and they are extraordinary. And they were pretty devastating for the Yoshioka school. It was a school that had once stood among, Kyoto's most prestigious martial lineages. It boasted generations of service to the Ashikaga shoguns, and a reputation rooted in the old Kyoto Hachiryu, the Kyo Hachiryu. And it simply unraveled. With Seijuro disgraced and Denshichiro killed and their last heir, Matashichiro, cut down, the Yoshioka line collapsed almost overnight. Now, what had been a pillar of Kyoto's martial world became, in the wake of Musashi's victories, a name spoken mostly in the past tense. Musashi defeated Yoshioka school 3 times and obviously emerged alive from a planned ambush. Now, that alone would have cemented his reputation across Kyoto. The practical reality is simpler than the tales of mowing down hordes of enemies. Blood and fat and all the stuff that comes out of a body dulls a blade pretty quickly, and a single decisive cut against Matashichiro would have broken the Yoshioka's will. Now, slipping away into the wooded terrain, around that area, after the fact, would have been pretty straightforward, even under arrow fire. These are the sorts of tactical calculations that appear in Gorin no Sho, where Musashi discusses fighting multiple opponents. After these Yoshioka duels, Musashi wrote his first text or book on swordsmanship. It's called the Heidokyo, and he wrote this in 1605, declaring himself Tenkaichi and establishing his own school. Now, this was not just a bit of youthful swagger. The Yoshioka victories were the moment Musashi exploded onto the big stage. They were the launching pad for his fame, the decisive turning point where a wandering provincial rōnin suddenly became a name that almost traveled faster than he could. Now, he marked this breakthrough the way only Musashi would. He formalized his own style and stamped his claim as number one under heaven, and set about writing this text, the Heidokyo, to prove it. Now, he called his school the Emmei-ryu. It's a name meaning something like clear, perfected illumination, suggesting a style grounded in sharp perception and, uncompromising clarity, not to be confused with his later Niten Ichiryu. But I'm going to talk about these schools in detail in a later podcast, I think. Anyway, 6 manuscript versions of Heidokyo survive. Now, the earliest is the Tada family copy, and this contains, I think it was 28 articles dated to 1605. 2 years later, it seems to have expanded to 3 volumes with more articles, but each manuscript is signed Miyamoto Musashi no Kami Yoshikaru, or Yoshigaru, which differs from his later name of Genshin. Rather than Yoshikaru, the kanji may actually be read Yoshitsune. It really depends on who you talk to. In any case, I mentioned the confusion about Musashi's names in a previous podcast, so please check that out. Anyway, in the postscript of Heidokyo, Musashi writes that in the early winter of 1604, he resolved to record the hidden principles of his art and create a mirror of strategy. He rescinds previous licenses that he gave to a handful of his students, and he declares in Heidokyo this is the authentic text of his style, claiming it contains a method unmatched in ancient or modern times. And he signs it Enmei-ryu Tenkaichi Miyamoto Musashi no Kami Fujiwara Yoshikaru. Given the dates, I think he spent a little over a year writing Heidokyo, during the peak of his Musha Shugyō. It means the techniques and insights that he writes about in Heidokyo are those that he actually tested and refined in real combat. Now, I'm going to explore the Heidokyo in more detail in a future episode. I think it's a really important, groundbreaking book. But for now, it stands as the clearest snapshot of Musashi's evolving understanding during the years he was constantly placing his life on the line in these duels and fighting. Musashi walked into Kyoto as an unknown rōnin, and he walked out as, someone the whole country would soon be whispering about. The Yoshioka duels did not just test his skill. They thrust him into the stream of history at full force. Now, from that point on, every step he took shaped the legend we still wrestle with today. Next time on Budo Bite, I'm going to return to 4 of his famous encounters, following the trail that leads toward the most iconic showdown of all. That was his meeting with Ganryu Kojiro, otherwise known as Sasaki Kojiro. So I'm looking forward to seeing you then. See you later.